Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. One of the last, later-ish portal additions that was made in late March, early April, was actually early April, was Ian Jackson entering the transfer portal the night of the national championship game. Okay. Incredible moment in time where Ian Jackson decides that about 3 hours before the title game, he's going to enter the portal. Producer Matt and I were out with Drew, our Torres on SJU page guy. We're out to lunch in San Antonio. Next thing you know, Ian Jackson is in the portal. So he goes in the portal the night of the national championship game. On this show, we said, listen, St. John's makes the most sense. We'll explain why in a minute. Well, I bring it up because it took 2 weeks, probably about 10 days or so longer than St. John's fans would have hoped for. But Ian Jackson did officially on Monday afternoon commit to the St. John's Red Storm. Listen, I think you can argue biggest commitment of Rick Pitino's time at St. John's. You could certainly argue from a pedigree perspective. He was, listen, they just, RJ Lewis was the Big East Player of the Year. Kadari Richmond is incredible. Zuby Ejiofor turned into something great. But as far as pedigree, as far as importance, as far as significance, Ian Jackson, right there is it. And you know what I got to say to that? Some Big Rick energy right there, man. That's some Big Rick energy. Make sure you get your Big Rick energy tees, AaronTorresOnline.com/merchandise. We also, like I said, we have our Torres on SJU page. Intern Drew does an amazing job running that. Torres on SJU and Big Rick energy. All right, let's go ahead and dive in. Ian Jackson, listen, first of all, a couple things here. One, like I said, this is maybe the least surprising, really big piece of portal news that we've gotten here over the course of the offseason. One, I remember the week that Rick Pitino got the St. John's job in the spring of 2023. Ian Jackson was in his junior year, already committed to North Carolina, and immediately St. John, it becomes this story of, can Rick Pitino flip Ian Jackson? I think he got the job on like a Thursday or a Friday, and that Monday he was at Ian Jackson's high school watching them practice, okay? And so from the moment Rick Pitino got that job, it was always a question, can he get him to flip? Can he get him to flip? I remember doing a video that spring. It does not happen, but Ian Jackson is from New York. It always felt like this was where it could end up. And the other thing was, St. John's just needed guards this offseason, and so it made perfect sense when he entered the portal. As far as what St. John's is going to get, listen, I know that Ian Jackson's a little bit of a polarizing player. I'm here to say, look, I understand he was a McDonald's All-American, top 10 prospect in his high school class. And so when you're not a one and done, when you're not Cooper Flagg, when you're not what we think AJ DeBonsa is going to be or whatever that everybody wants to criticize, I thought he was pretty good as a freshman in college basketball this past year. I know he struggled late, but again, we've talked about it. The middle of the season, he was as good as any guard in the ACC. 24 points against UCLA, 23 points against Louisville, 27 against Notre Dame, 21 against NC State, 23 at Syracuse. Did struggle down the stretch, but ended up averaging 11.5 points per game. Ended up averaging 41% shooting from behind the three-point arc. Again, or 39% shooting from the three-point arc, not great, but still very good, and especially very good for a freshman in a power conference. Now, what becomes interesting about Ian Jackson's commitment is that he played off the ball at North Carolina, where Elliot Cadeau is the starting point guard. Elliot Cadeau, of course, is now at Michigan, neither here nor there. But I bring it up because that ain't going to be the case at St. John's. It was actually very interesting in the press release from Rick Pitino, because this is now official, school announced it and everything. Let's see what Rick Pitino had to say about Ian Jackson. This quote from Adam Zagoria. Adam Zagoria pulled the quote, but it was on the press release. Rick Pitino says, We had big shoes to fill at the point guard position. Kadari Richmond and Davion Smith were awesome. The ball is now in the hands of our next great point guard. Let's go, Ian. So what I can tell you about the Ian Jackson situation is two things. One, this was not the plan from St. John's. The St. John's has known basically since the week the portal opened, they were going to need guard help. They get JOHNS Sinan right away. We'll talk about him in a minute. Bryce Hopkins right away. Zuby Ejiofor's coming back. They knew they were going to need help. And the plan was, let's get a lead guard and let's have Ian Jackson play off the ball. If you remember, Xavier Lee, the point guard who is now committed to Florida, took a visit right around the time of Ian Jackson. St. John's was hoping to get a commitment from both. They would have taken a commitment from both. I mentioned earlier in the show, DJ Wagner, there was talk for a long time that he was going to at one point enter the portal this offseason. He does not. St. John's would have been a logical landing spot. There were some other guys, I'm not going to name names because the portal technically is still open, that if they had entered the portal, I know St. John's would have been aggressive with. But they don't enter, and so now Ian Jackson is going to be your lead guard. But what I would also say is just because this wasn't necessarily the primary plan doesn't mean that it cannot work. Ian Jackson was not asked to be a point guard at North Carolina this year, but it doesn't mean that he's not capable of it. And oh, by the way, you look at what St. John's did this year. Kadari Richmond was a point guard. He was also a great scorer. He was a guy that, yes, he set other people up, but he also was a guy that was a difference maker when he was attacking the rim as well. And so do I trust that if Rick Pitino believes he can turn Ian Jackson into, quote, our next great point guard, that Ian Jackson can do it? I do, because I inherently trust Rick Pitino to pretty much do, basically, I'll be honest. At this point, I pretty much trust Rick Pitino to do anything. He's that dude. He's that good. He's that kind of difference maker when he is your head coach. So one, I just trust Rick Pitino. Two, and I think this is equally important, Ian Jackson's going to have plenty of talent around him. Ian Jackson, as we discussed, think about the roster that he's going to have around him. He is going to have JOHNS Sinan, former basically 5-star recruit, was a guy who was very good. Another guy who was very good as a freshman this past year at Arizona State, was a guy who averaged 12 points per game, shot 37% from behind the three-point arc. And this was as a true freshman. He is coming to St. John's. Bryce Hopkins, who we've talked about a lot, was at Providence when he was healthy 3 seasons ago now, was an all Big East kind of guy, 15, almost 16 points per game and about 8.5 rebounds per game. Gets hurt in a season where he was trending as an all Big East guy. This year he comes back, is averaging 17 and 8 before he goes down with a separate injury that cost him the rest of the year. So you have Bryce Hopkins, you have JOHNS Sinan, and you have Zuby Ejiofor as well. We know how good Zuby Ejiofor was late in the season when as he got more comfortable as the starting center on that team. Averaged 15 and 8, but had 33 and 9 in a Big East tournament game against Marquette. And so I look at this roster. Listen, I think it's largely done. Now, I'll say this too. The other thing with Ian Jackson, I don't know that St. John's is done recruiting guards. One, we'll see, is there somebody else that enters the portal in the next 24 hours that St. John's can convince to become a member of the Red Storm? I think if the right guy entered the portal, I don't think that St. John's would refuse to take him. Let me put it that way. I think if the right guy entered the portal and was like, oh, that can be our point guard and Ian Jackson can play off the ball, I think Rick Pitino would take that guy. Two, and I think this is worth noting, they're also recruiting a Caden Lewis. Caden Lewis was the 4-star who was committed to Kentucky. He decommitted, looking for a bigger role than Kentucky would have been able to provide. I only bring it up because, listen, wouldn't it be a shocker to me if Caden Lewis took a visit to St. John's? You know, his dad has said some gushing things about Rick Pitino. And so is that a guy that you can pair in the backcourt with Ian Jackson? Is that a guy that can be your 6th man to start the year, that maybe by the middle to the end of the year could be the type of guy that could be a starting point guard in the Big East? It remains to be seen. One thing I will say, Ian Jackson, like I said, I think he's the biggest commit that Rick Pitino has gotten. He's got all Big East potential. He has a chance to be really good, and Rick Pitino does not slow down.